Welcome back to a special edition of the PFF podcast where we're going to talk Tony Romo and the legacy he leaves behind as he retires as quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. Sam Monson here. I'm joined by PFF's resident QB guru and one half of the PFF quarterback podcast, Zach Robinson. Zach, Tony Romo retires.
I can't believe it. I thought, especially after last season, everything that went on, obviously, I just thought that there was going to be a burn in him to come back and kind of prove to people. But, definitely first initial reaction, like most, is pretty shocked.
It's this whole bait and switch thing. We've been waiting all off season for the Cowboys to trade Romo and then for the Cowboys to release Romo so that he could finally go and become the quarterback of either the Denver Broncos or the Houston Texans. This kind of Peyton Manning-like bidding war, and then it just doesn't happen. He just walks away and quits.
Right. Yeah, I thought for sure it was going to be the Texans, in the last few weeks. It just looked like, they weren't going to give up, any trade value or anything. But, I thought for sure he was going to come back. Personally, I grew up a Denver Broncos fan growing up in Denver. I wanted to see him in a Broncos uniform. So, definitely kind of threw a curveball with everything that's been reported, this whole off season.
The really kind of the caveat to all of this is that a couple of minutes after the report that he'd retired, there were a bunch more little reports about, he might be tempted back for the right offer, when somebody goes down in training camp or, if a team gets desperate enough later on. So this retirement may not be final, and that gives everyone these kind of Pavlovian reactions to Brett Favre sagas and all this kind of stuff. But do you think he's actually going to be done, or are we going to see him back in 2017?
Gosh, I have a hard time believing that he can walk away the way he did. Obviously the injuries and everything that's happened the past couple of years, but I think he truly believes that he can still play and play at a very high level. I know we saw just a very short drive of him last year, but I mean, it looked like just the normal Romo, and whether he can, sustain that over a full season, I don't know. But I just have a very hard time believing, the competitor that he is, that he truly is able to just say, all right, that's what happened. Let's move on. I have a very hard time, seeing that happen.
It seems to take a lot of, I don't know if discipline is the right word, but it's a very big call for a guy like Romo, who, like you say, looks like he can still play at a really high level, to say, you know what, I've now had multiple injuries over the last couple of years. I was never the most durable of quarterbacks to begin with. I'm going to be leaving arguably the best offensive line in the NFL and going to either one of two offensive lines, if you assume Houston and Denver, the two teams in for him, that are really nowhere near as good as Dallas is. So I'm going to be taking a lot more of a beating in the next couple of years, and you know what? It's just not worth it. I'm gonna hang them up instead.
Right. Yeah. You can see it, and obviously with the career in broadcasting, and then if you came back and got injured again, what would that look like for his second career kind of here after football? So you understand it. It's just it's too bad how it ended. That back injury when he went down last year, that was. I think that would have been an awkward injury for anybody to take, much less somebody, with the history that he had with his back. It was just an awkward hit, and you knew right away that, man, that looked to be like it could be the final deal, and unfortunately, it looks like it is.
And it looked like such an innocuous hit as well. I mean, that's the really worrying thing when you get guys that, I guess any hit can look relatively innocuous, but you don't really know the forces involved. But when you look at a guy who's getting hurt from stuff that doesn't look like it should be hurting you, that's probably a bit of a red flag. So we'll put this caveat on all of this that we could well still see Tony Romo come back somewhere in 2017 if the right opportunity presents itself. But let's assume that he is in fact retired. It brings up these kind of legacy questions of just how good Tony Romo has been over the past decade. And I think he's one of the most polarizing quarterbacks that we've seen in an era where everybody is polarizing. You either suck or you're amazing. There's no in between. And that seems only more pronounced with Tony Romo. There's nobody that will tell you that Tony Romo was just a decent quarterback. He's either, great, he's a Hall of Famer, he's the best quarterback Dallas ever had, or he sucks. He could never win a playoff game. He's been garbage the whole time, and they're better off with Dak.
Right. Yeah. And I totally agree. That's kind of just, and I live here in Dallas. And so you got the Romo haters that always say, oh, he doesn't play well in big games. Well, that's not really always the case. I mean, he's played well in a number of big games. And so, for me personally, I loved watching the guy play. I just thought his overall kind of feel for the game and, his instinctual part of the game and feeling the pocket and being able to move around and make plays is kind of what I'll always remember him for. I remember, when I first got into the NFL, you watch a bunch of crossover tape and there was a few guys that, when they came on the screen, you kind of perked up. And I remember it was, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, and then Romo was always that guy as well, just because you never knew what was going to happen throughout the course of the game. There's going to be, 5 handful of plays that other guys couldn't do, or they wouldn't even try to make that play. So always a lot of fun to watch, and always had just a ton of respect just for his overall game.
So the first thing that has started to come around with some people on Twitter and generally is out there, I kind of want to discuss before we go any further, is Tony Romo as a Hall of Fame quarterback. Now, I have a harsher view of the Hall of Fame than most people, and there's guys in there at the moment that I wouldn't have put in there, and I think it should be the absolute elite of the elite. So for me, Tony Romo isn't really in the conversation, but given some of the guys that are there already, the Warren Moon type players, is there any case for Tony Romo to be a Hall of Fame quarterback?
It's hard. I think you look at the body of work and, I think he finished, obviously passer rating such a big stat that everybody can kind of look at and say, okay, this is what he was. And I think he ends up third all time passer rating. So you look at that and that's great. But I just have a hard time, without the playoff run and the Super Bowls that typically we're used to seeing from guys that get in. It's very hard to just throw him in there with that. But certainly the body of the work of over the, regular season and everything that he's done could warrant him. And he is probably a better player than a lot of guys in there. But it's just hard to say without that memorable playoff run or Super Bowl to really throw him in there.
And that's the thing, because it becomes it's such a weird thing, the Hall of Fame, because you almost need that signature playoff run just for the symbolism, because
right,
wins and to an extent whether you get a Super Bowl or not, it's usually down to the team. Very rarely does a quarterback individually become the sole part or the biggest defining reason that his team has won a Super Bowl championship. I suppose you could look at Eli Manning in 2011, Joe Flacco when he caught fire. That doesn't happen without him doing that. But, when you look at, like you said, Tony Romo ends his career as the third highest all-time in passer rating, 0.1 points behind Tom Brady, 0.3 points ahead of Steve Young, 0.6 ahead of Peyton Manning. Those are some pretty heavy hitters in terms of that. Obviously, passer rating generally has gone up in recent years, but even if you index it for era and look back, his career passer rating is very similar to Troy Aikman. The only difference is Troy Aikman sat at the helm of this, dynastic juggernaut of the Cowboys in the 90s, right, whereas Tony Romo just had some okay Cowboys teams. So he has no rings, and Troy Aikman's got a fistful of them.
Yeah, you look at some of those teams that he played on, and if he's not on those teams, they might go, 2-14, 3. There's in some of those seasons where they end up 8-8 or fighting to get into the playoffs. I mean, he was a huge part of just them being that good because they just weren't that great around. And then you look at 2014, the Dez Bryant catch in Lambeau or not catch, that ultimately could have completely changed his legacy there. And then this past season was his best chance at really, having the pieces around to make a run, and he gets injured. So it's just kind of how things worked out, and it's really unfortunate. I personally thought that 2014 was going to be the year when everything was clicking, and then they go up there and have that game there. But overall, man, just a lot of fun to watch the guy play.
I guess the point is, if you replace Troy Aikman with Tony Romo on those Dallas teams that were so good in the 90s, they're probably not winning any fewer Super Bowls, just in terms of how those two guys played the game. But Troy Aikman is the guy with the accolades and the postseason runs and the Super Bowl rings. And Tony Romo doesn't have them because his teams weren't as good. So he doesn't get the same boost in terms of Hall of Fame credentials. I got Nathan, our resident statistical guru, to run some numbers to find out where Tony Romo ranked kind of during the PFF era, if you like, from 2006 onwards when we've been doing all the grading. And Romo's passer rating when kept clean since 2006 was 105.8, which is the sixth best of any quarterback over the past decade. But interestingly, his passer rating when he's pressured, and that's often been the knock on Tony Romo, is that when the pressure comes on, it tends to fall apart a little bit more, and he's a bit of a kind of fast track bully. He can do really well when he's kept clean and when there's no pressure, but for a couple of incredible plays where he'll escape a would-be tackler and make something special happen, the pressure is what really gets to him. But his passer rating when he's been under pressure over the past decade is 74.6, which doesn't sound great, but that is the fourth best of any quarterback over the past decade. So Romo, in terms of relating it to other quarterbacks, has actually been better over the past decade under pressure than he has been when kept clean.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, I was actually looking at those same stats before we started here, and 2014 was right up there in the top 5. I mean, it seems like every single year he was at least in the top 10 to 5 guys in pass rating under pressure. I mean, he just had just that knack for making plays and feeling defenders, and yeah, it would result in some poor decisions and some bad interceptions that you're scratching your head saying, what in the world would get you to throw that? But then the next time he does it, he looks like Houdini back there and completes a long touchdown. And so, I mean, it was the good and bad with Romo, and certainly I remember just kind of the red zone. Those type of plays in the red zone under pressure where he's spinning out of a guy and extending the play and making something happen.
There has always been a large amount of Brett Favre about Tony Romo. I mean, with the one exception of Brett Favre being made of granite and Tony Romo being made out of something significantly more brittle than granite. In terms of how they played, the two of them were very similar. You got the incredible plays that you think there's just nobody out there that can make that other than him. But you always had the bad as well. And, Brett Favre was a Hall of Fame quarterback, but there were always the bonehead, horrible decisions that went along with it all. And you just accepted that as part of the deal. And it's the same thing with Tony Romo. I mean, you would have games where it's almost like he didn't see linebackers. He would just toss the ball straight to a guy that was always in the throwing lane. And you think, how did you not see that guy there? I mean, he didn't come from nowhere. He was always right in front of your line of sight, and you just threw him the ball. And he never seemed to rid himself of that. But, like I say, it was part of the package.
Right, yeah. It was interesting that you think that some of those decision-making things just, get better over time or whatnot. But it really just was who he was as a player. There was nothing he felt like he couldn't do out there. He's a fearless guy. Thought he could make every single throw, thought he could make every single play. And like you said, there was a lot of bad that came with it, but certainly made for a lot of good highlights here down the road.
And then the last element to all of this is that if you look at where he came from, this was an undrafted quarterback out of, was it Eastern Illinois? He came out of the same school as Jimmy Garoppolo. That's a big leap to suddenly be the starting quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah,
no kidding. I heard earlier today that coming out, he had $20,000 offered to him from, I believe, the Broncos, and $10,000 offered to him from the Cowboys as an undrafted free agent. And to see where he went and the contract, I believe he made $130 million over his time. I mean, kind of says the type of guy. I mean, you always heard he was a gym rat and loved ball and just loved studying the game. And so you see kind of why he was ultimately able to make that jump and become the player he is.
It's not a bad little investment, 10 grand into $130 million.
Not bad at all.
And I guess, everyone, we could get bogged down talking about Hall of Fame credentials and where he fits in terms of all time and all that kind of stuff. And whatever you do there, you're gonna piss somebody off. But if you look at just the undrafted aspect of it, I mean, he will go down as one of the best undrafted players ever in NFL history. I mean, he's got to be in the top 5, 10 of those guys that I can think of.
Absolutely. I mean, especially when you look at a quarterback, it's so hard to see guys slip that far under the radar and go undrafted, and to be able to do that, pretty amazing stuff.
So there we go. That's going to do it. That's our reaction to the news that Tony Romo has retired, at least for now. Pay attention to the NFL. It may not be done. Somebody might get desperate enough. Somebody might come calling. The latest story is that he could be tempted back out of retirement if Dallas has an injury crisis. If Dak Prescott goes down, Tony Romo could ride back to the rescue out of his man cave, off the couch. But at least for now,
off of the golf course, probably. Yeah.
At least for now, Tony Romo has retired and brings to a close one of the greatest undrafted NFL careers of all time. Hope you've enjoyed listening to this. Check out PFF's Draft Pass at profootballfocus.com/draft pass. And we'll be back later in the week. I think the boys are going to be back 2 days from now for the draft show. So I hope you enjoyed listening to this. From me and Zach, take it easy.